Is smoking allowed on a cruise ship? The short answer is yes, but there is a lot more involved in that, especially now with vaping and marijuana becoming legalized in different areas. We've had a lot of conversations with different cruisers, so as we go through this, make sure you let us know your opinions as well in the comments below. Regardless of if you are a smoker or not, you're going to want to hear these rules. All that and more coming right up.
So I want to be clear, we're mostly going to talk about rules here. We're going to talk a little bit of our personal experience. Other people have their own personal experiences, but we want to outline the rules of what you're able to do on a cruise ship. We come from a country in Canada where marijuana is legalized. You can buy it in stores. That doesn't mean you can use it everywhere. That doesn't mean that you can take it on a cruise ship. A lot of different rules, but we also want to talk about how it might affect a passenger, especially since those are the rules where you're not necessarily expecting somebody to have these different types of tobacco products or marijuana products, etc.
Yeah, it's important to know traveling with different cruise lines, they are going to have some different rules around smoking in general. And that's important to know also if you've never cruised before. You might think, oh, in a hotel, if I have a room with a balcony, I can smoke on the balcony. That is not the case when cruising. With the majority of cruise lines, especially in North America, you cannot smoke on your balcony. I do come from a little bias here. I am very sensitive to cigarette smoke. I have like allergic reactions to it. So I know the first one and one that really stands out to me was when we were sailing with NCL on the breakaway, and they had this beautiful glass stairwell. It goes up 2 or 3 stories. It was gorgeous, and I like taking stairs. I like being in those environments and seeing them. And well, where their casino was right in the middle, and that is where they were allowing smoking. So this stairwell, because it was open, constantly smelled like smoke on all of it. And I definitely, my sensitivities did not want to be breathing heavy going upstairs in that area. So I was a little disappointed because I actually had to actively avoid that area because of how it was set up with the casino and being an open area. So there are things like that, if you're sensitive, that might bother you.
And that said, for people who are smoking in the casinos that have open windows, you are allowed to. That was fine in that scenario. But if you do have sensitivities, you should be aware.
So this takes us well into the rules about where smoking is allowed. There are certain areas on the cruise ship, usually the casinos are allowed to smoke in, as well as cigar lounges, and there's often an area on the pool deck. It's not the whole pool deck, but they'll have a smoking area. You know, sometimes it can be off to the side or not, so keep that in mind. There is no smoking in the staterooms, restaurants, or theaters. If you are thinking, oh, well, I'll just use a vape pen, they're actually considered the same category as smoking. So they're not allowed unless you are in those designated smoking areas.
Yeah. Now, you are allowed to smoke on certain cruise lines. So there is, for example, Costa Cruise Lines, which is European, and there's also Fred Olsen, which is another European cruise line. And those do allow smoking in certain areas that are broader, allowed on balconies and allowed on other areas like that. So it's a bit of a looser rule. However, in most American cruise lines, smoking is prohibited on balconies. In your own stateroom, anything along those lines, you cannot smoke. There was a great example of the Star Princess in, I think, 2006, where somebody was smoking. They decided to take a cigarette out and have a smoke.
On their balcony.
On their balcony. You might think that that's okay, but what had happened was some people were drying their towels below. The ember caught the towel. Almost, I think it was a quarter of the side of the ship caught on fire. The balconies basically melted, and they had an emergency at sea for that fire. Now, there is also an interesting side note to that, was they had one of the first fire suppression systems, a new fire suppression system, and even though they had fires on the balconies, the chocolate mints they put on the pillow, none of those cabins, chocolate melted because of the fire suppression
Priority.
So it is a safe thing, just don't do it. So I think that's an important one. And I think we also get a lot of questions about marijuana. I think you hear about this all the time. I know on Reddit, whenever you're on any of those subreddits for cruising, everyone always asks about marijuana. In the United States specifically, it is illegal federally. Even if it's legal in any sort of state, that does not mean federal guidelines will apply. It is illegal. Additionally, in Canada, if you had a cruise that only stood in Canada, which there aren't really any, but if you had one, you could more than likely use marijuana on it. However, if you are transiting any country, even if it's legal, that is illegal to import the marijuana. People might say, oh, it's legal in my state, I'm going to take it on a cruise ship, and I'm sure Canada will be fine with it. No, we want our tax dollars. We tax marijuana. You can buy it in port. You can use it like you would alcohol in Canada. You cannot bring it on a ship, and you cannot bring it across borders. That includes basically every country has rules about importing marijuana. And if you are caught, you will be kicked off the ship. If not worse, turned over to police. So opinion, don't do it. Do they search everything? That's not up to us to determine. But the rules as they are stated is it is not allowed. You cannot bring it into a country, and unless the United States changes those rules, that's what's in place. And that will not change if you're transiting countries, which you have to do on a cruise. So one of the rules in America is that you have to hit a third-party country for it to be considered a cruise that isn't run by Americans. So therefore, even if they change federal rules, you will still have local rules as you transit those countries.
Yeah, being fined and kicked off a cruise ship doesn't sound like fun to me, and then finding my way home. If you were somebody who was looking for some more restrictive rules around smoking and where it can happen on cruise ships, a few cruise lines do offer that. So that would be Celebrity, Disney, P&O, Viking Ocean, and Sea Dream. So if you don't want there to be a ton of smoking, for example, on the pool decks. I know when we were sailing once with Royal Caribbean, they had the smoking on one port side, and the only seats you could find were, of course, on that side because there were more people who didn't want to be in the smoking area, especially when it's on a pool deck like that. It does move around. You're moving.
Yeah,
so
I think one of the funny things I find sometimes about smoking areas is they put them up towards the front of the ship, and when the ship's moving, all the smoke comes downwind. You kind of feel like just put it, like you could just move it back a little bit.
Yes, that actually is exactly what happened for when we were on the Carnival in the Havana area. So, you know, there was near the front of the ship on the Mardi Gras, and we kept smelling smoke when we were outside. We're like, what's happening? What's happening? So for the crew, their smoking area was right at the front of the ship there, and it just so happened to blow back to where we were. So just something to keep in mind if you do have really bad allergies or asthma, and you definitely do not want to be really experiencing a lot of those smoking areas, or looking for a cruise line which is more strict on the smoking, those cruise lines would be the one for you.
So one additional part is vaping. That's another category that people always say, well, I'm not burning anything. It's not necessarily the same thing. There are, of course, risks to vaping. I think when you look at cruise laws currently, they talk more about combustion and fire safety in terms of having cigarettes or cigars outside of the balconies or inside of cabins or in common areas. They don't talk as much about vaping. Perhaps those rules will change. However, currently vaping is not allowed. It is treated as a cigarette. So anywhere that cigarette laws apply or rules apply, so does vaping.
Yeah, it was interesting. We were on a cruise ship before, and I have seen people doing it on elevators and this and that. And for now, like, everybody to their own, but it is a risk, and you could be fined or more. So, you know, keep that in mind, especially around the use of vaping. It is considered smoking as well. Another interesting sort of side story with that and around the balconies, when we were cruising, we were in the Havana. So you had this private pool area, an outside bar area, and it was literally the first cabin next to it. And you have a little outdoor balcony area. And the guy's there smoking his cigar, having the time of his life. I think he booked that cabin specifically. He is so close to the Havana. The bar is right there. He can quickly, easily walk over, get a drink, go back to his own private little balcony area. I can see him having dreams of having his drink on the balcony and having his cigar, except it's not allowed. And very quickly that was shut down. And I could hear him, you know, complaining, oh, you know, somebody ratted on me. The bartender is right there. Like, I'm sure if his boss came by, he would be asking him, why haven't you reported this? So just keep that in mind. It is definitely not allowed, not even cigars, nothing on the pool deck. So we'd love to know. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, and there are a lot of cameras down the side of the ship. So people always talk about, you know, smoking in a balcony, someone narking them. There's also a lot of cameras, and that goes for anything people do on balconies. So there are cameras. You will be on camera. And the cameras are generally there for passengers that might go overboard and for general security. So they do surveil those cameras. They check them. Just be aware. You know, we don't want you to get in trouble. You take the risk of your own. However, there are cameras on the sides of the ships, and they do not look into balconies, but they can see people smoking on the sides of their balconies.
So as we said, and as Aaron said, we did make sure we give you the facts you need to know. Not be overly biased, although I do personally know that for me, smoking is an issue. So we'd love to know your thoughts, opinions below. Should the cruise lines be changing this more flexible? Would you prefer them to become more rigid? And what are your thoughts as marijuana is becoming legal in more places and vaping? So again, we'd love to hear your ideas and opinions in the comments below. As we say, memories are forever, so make them fabulous. Thanks again for watching and happy travels.